Caroline Hood is a certified sex therapist and licensed clinical social worker, and the author of Sex Begets Sex, Reclaiming Desire, Power, and Pleasure in Long-Term Love. She works under the name Desire in Real Life, offering what she describes as a conversation women wish they could have with a trusted girlfriend who happens to be a sex therapist. Caroline challenges the cultural assumption that desire inevitably fades in long-term relationships, arguing instead that frequency itself can be a driver of pleasure, not simply its results. She's also a mother of 3 and has been with her partner for 18 years, bringing both clinical experience and lived experience to the conversation. Thank you very much. Second time we've done this, but this time we'll be able to hear each other. Right, so let's get into it. So I want to get into the book, but just before we get there, I'm curious about your own relationship with the subject. So growing up, was sexuality something that felt open and discussable in your world, or did you have to find a way to make that comfortable?
I think like a lot of women, I had to find my path toward it. I grew up in a religious family and a religious school for kindergarten all throughout primary and secondary. And really, I think learned very little about sexuality, and underpinning learning very little was sort of learning shame, that somehow sexuality was bad or wrong, and certainly female sexuality was bad or wrong or invalid. And so I did have that education or lack thereof, but I had this like niggling suspicion that couldn't be right, that there needed to be something more, because I just had the sense that there was a universalness about sex and sexuality that literally keeps the species going. And so how can it be this thing that is shameful and wrong if it's also so critical and so universal? So, but I had to become an adult to discover that and educate myself and re-educate myself and make a lot of mistakes along the way. Because I was sort of walking around blind for a really long time.
So after that sort of, I guess, on the self-exposure to the topics and finding your own path, what was it that led you to become almost opposite to where you started? So you then became a sex therapist, licensed social worker. What was it that sort of drove you on that path, you think?
It was certainly that curiosity that I spoke about. I think humans are fascinating. I mean, some people love to just, discover space or insects or the oceans, but I just think human beings are sort of wildly fascinating. And so I've always been interested in what makes us tick and then what makes our behavior as it is. And so I went to school for psychology. I got my master's in social work. So I've always been interested in human behavior within the context of their larger environments, whether that's familial or societal or generational. And as I said, this sexuality and relationships and intimacy is such an interesting cluster of dynamics that involves both the physiological, the psychological, the emotional, trauma, shame, religion, all sorts of messaging. And so for me, it's just this really interesting exploration that I think is just so critical. And there's a lot out there that makes sex feel like it's dirty or wrong or just taboo in not the fun way. And so I wanted to just explore that and figure out how we could have these conversations that really normalize this aspect of of who we all are.
Yeah, it's fascinating what you say about. I mean, I know we sort of spend a lot of time exploring the deepest reaches of space, the deepest depths of the ocean, but this organ between our ears, we still have a very sort of small family of what our brain delivers, really. So no, I hadn't really thought of it that way, but no, I really like that. And I think one of the things that I really like is that you talk about almost wishing the conversation would be the one that you'd have with a trusted girlfriend that happens to be a sex therapist, as opposed to sometimes the very clinical language that's used when talking about intimacy and relationships.
Yes, yes. And I think there's so many excellent researchers and people doing wonderful work, but I tend to feel like there can be this spectrum where you either read or hear about it in a very clinical way, like you feel like you're at the doctor's office doing an exam, or it's the total opposite where you're in porn or OnlyFans, and it's the salacious side. And I think a lot of people, like a bell curve, like a normal distribution, I think a lot of people kind of live in the middle. And so they want to talk about it, but they also, particularly when you move from, okay, well, there's the physiological and the hormonal, and people can kind of get comfortable in those spaces of the conversation. But when it ventures toward pleasure and toward other things that are um, potentially more shame laden or confusing or taboo, that's really when I think the conversation can get tricky, and we want to be able to open that up.
And do you think it's sort of historical, um, religious, and societal pressure and narrative that sort of makes that almost that word pleasure something that we shouldn't really be looking for?
I think that's extremely prevalent. I think that I think that you can't disentangle religion from patriarchy. They're very much intertwined, and power dynamics that have for centuries been folded into how laws are, how policy is legislated, how we live our lives.
Mhm.
And so with women in particular, there's certainly this piece where women are taught that we are certainly supposed to be sexy in the male gaze for others, but we're not supposed to be sexual. That's not okay. It's that Madonna whore. And it's this idea that if women have desire, there's there's a power imbalance that that we are not supposed to have. And so sort of asserting pleasure from that female perspective really, I think, upsets some structural things for people that make it very concerning. And then I think for everyone, there is still simply a lack of understanding when it comes to pleasure. Sex is very performative, and we all hear or see these messages, and so men think they're supposed to look a certain way or act a certain way or like a certain type of woman. I think we all are sort of looking at these archetypes out there saying, okay, well, I guess I'm just supposed to fall into this bucket, when it's all normal. It's all, but we're just not talking about it in a way that's normalized.
Mm. Um, what was it that sort of led you to take on the very, very challenging prospect of writing a book?
Oh gosh. It almost I had been contemplating writing a book for a while and toying with it and thinking, like, yeah, I have this idea, I have this idea. Um, but at some point it just felt like I had it, it was like the book came from me and I had no control, and I just sat down and began writing, and I did have time. My family and I moved across the globe, and had to quit my full-time job and had about 6 months before I got another full-time job. And all of a sudden, as a 43-year-old person, I had the first space I think I've ever had in my entire life. And it poured out of me. All of a sudden I sat down to write, and it was almost a compulsion. Um, and so the book is really a hopeful message. I think so many people get to midlife or older and feel that the best of their sex lives are gone, and that desire is gone away. And if you've been married for 10, 20, 30 years, yes, you may love that person, but but the sex life, it's just gone, and you should just grieve it and move to a place of acceptance. And I think that there are other ways to approach sex as we age and in long-term relationships, and I just want people to feel empowered to think about it differently.
Mm. And I think one thing that's very different about your book is, I guess the argument is typically been that, the wisdom has typically been that desire has to precede sex. But I think sex begets sex almost suggests that the desire often follows sex. And I wonder where your thinking was around that.
I think there's a couple things. I think there's some research out there. Emily Nagoski is always cited as sort of the preeminent researcher around desire, where she categorizes spontaneous desire and responsive desire in two separate methods to sort of assert that most people think of desire as the spontaneous, that you just think of sex and you want to have sex with your partner or whomever, and responsive desire being that which you need to put yourself in a situation where you're kissing, you're being intimate in some ways, and the desire sort of, once you're physically on board, the mental piece will click on. I think that's one piece that's really smart for people to recognize, that desire can come in a number of ways. But even today, I was reading an article by a really lovely author and respected psychologist, who was talking about in partnerships where intimacy dwindles, there emotional intimacy should be first sought, and then physical intimacy follows. And so sort of talking about marriages that were sexless. And I think that is, as you asserted, the sort of common wisdom. I do think there is a different feedback mechanism that also happens. So it's not always emotional, shore up the emotional, that's good, and then the product is physical. I think that it's more of a loop. And you certainly, I'm not saying don't pay attention to the emotional intimacy, that's very important. But what I am saying is that physical intimacy can be a buffer against all that other stress that you might have in your life. And if you maintain that physical intimacy with your partner, it can facilitate emotional intimacy, and so on and so forth. And there can be this loop that I don't believe is solely unidirectional. It's not simply emotional drives physical. I think physical can drive emotional and vice versa. And that's not the sort of commonly held wisdom that is out in the ether.
Yeah, and I think there's all, and forgive my complete ignorance, but I think there's almost also that belief that many people have, is that men are always ready for sex. And then, yeah, okay, let's go. Whereas women need to be, it needs to be romantic, and they feel nourished and feel nurtured, and it's slow build, and it needs to feel desired and feel desirable and feel sexy, all those sort of things. And it's, I guess the idea that physical intimacy can drive emotional intimacy almost sort of scores that through. So is that thinking quite old fashioned?
I think all of those tropes, those archetypes, the man's always ready for it, and the woman has the headache or whatever, whatever the joke is it's not serving anyone.
No.
I don't think it's serving the man, because I think men are then pressured to feel like they should always be able to perform. And we certainly know that's not always the case. And then there's certainly, that's where confidence and ego and shame come into play. So that's not serving men. And on the flip side, when the idea or the common narrative is that women must be romanticized, that there must be an elaborate buildup, or that women are never desirous spontaneously as men are, also, I think, creates an unfortunate dynamic, which is that women's desire requires an explanation. So if a man has desire, it's because boys will be boys, or some other, it's validated without question. When women are desirous and want to have sex, there's almost a question of like, well, what is she after? Is she trying to get pregnant? Is she trying to trap a man? Does she think he's cheating? Is there some ulterior motive? And if we can't check one of those boxes that I just listed, well, then there must be something that then she's a slut, and there's a negative connotation brought to her. So nobody is winning from any of these archetypes that we've put on men and women. But we're also not talking about it. So then we're all just trying to put ourselves in a box that doesn't really work. And then partners aren't talking to one another about what they actually want and how they actually feel. And maybe the man is thinking, oh, I wish she would initiate from time to time. Why am I always in this space? And she might be thinking, I would like to have more sex, but every time I do initiate, he sort of reacts with this big shock, and it makes me feel a little sheepish or a little uncomfortable. So I don't want to do that because that reaction feels funny to me. So there's all of this stuff happening behind the scenes and not being discussed, and I just don't think anybody is being served by following along in these tropes without talking about it.
Mm. And I think one of the things that is a challenge, I guess, is how we've come to define what sex actually is. So I think as we get older, so certainly for men and for women, our bodies change, our hormone levels change. I mean, my erections aren't the same as well when I was 20 or 25, for goodness sake. And sometimes I can't perform. And gosh, I can't. So we can't have sex. And then it gets in your head that, okay, the next time, is it going to happen again? But then you think, well, that's because I'm assuming that sex is penis and vagina. That's what sex is.
Right.
So, but
Right.
are you talking about the sort of broader gamut of sex and what pleasure is?
Yes. I think it's really important for really thinking under the constructs of heterosexual relationships with cisgender men and women, where it's so common to define sex as penetration, penis and vagina. That's the first base, second base, third base, home base idea, where anything else that you might do is only in service of that final outcome. It can't be an outcome on its own. So oral sex can't be an outcome on its own, full stop. It only occurs so that you can get to penetration. And I think penetrative sex it's simply more physically demanding than other forms of sex. So as we age, or if you're parenting and not getting any sleep, simply logistically, it creates more barriers to entry than if you have a broader definition, right? I think also from a pleasure standpoint, it diminishes female pleasure by relegating other types of clitoral stimulation to nice to have but not need to have, where that's certainly the vast percentage of women are having orgasm through ways that are not penetrative sex, more 80% or so. So all of these things, I think we just make it harder on ourselves than we need to be. We could be having a lot more fun with our partners if we're more expansive in our definitions, and we think about, there's obviously oral sex, there's mutual masturbation, there's other touching, there's pleasure that doesn't necessarily have to result in an orgasm, that is still very much sex and can be pleasurable. But it just requires that expansiveness of definition, as you said, and it allows for a little bit more playfulness if people can approach it in that sense, and I think it just makes the whole thing a lot easier and a lot lower stakes.
It's funny, isn't it? Yeah, just thinking then as you were saying that, like some of the most fun, enjoyable sex that I've had, somebody probably wouldn't consider it as actually sex.
I don't think you're alone. I doubt that you are the only person with that story. I think that's very common.
And I know talking to people that they define the relationships they're in as having a kink relationships or a BDSM relationship, or BDSM scenes or whatever. But very, very, very little of that, if any, is actually about penis and vagina. It's a very, very different experience altogether. And there's something that they talk about, have a dialogue about, plan and prepare for, and it's not that rarely is, if ever, spontaneous. But they say it's often the most extreme pleasurable experience that they've had. So it's really interesting. Some of those things that you think, gosh, that's really odd, and that's actually no, that's the one that's not spontaneous. It's planned, it's prepared, it's discussed, it's negotiated. It's we commit to this, commit to that, talk about this, talk about that. Then I think, gosh, how almost the opposite to spontaneous could it be? But ultimately, it's incredibly pleasurable.
Right. Yeah. I'm not sure. I wish, maybe I'll do a little research side project. I don't know where spontaneity became the highest value of sex, the thing that said, well, if it's spontaneous, then that must be it's true love, or it must mean we're meant to be. Because as you just mentioned, much of what we see and hear from people as the most erotic, the sort of most pleasurable sex is certainly not spontaneous. It's very orchestrated. It's very planned. It's hugely communicated. It's very structured. And yet it's wildly intimate. So even if if you're somebody listening and going, okay, well, I'm not into that, I'm a pretty vanilla person. The sex that you had probably while you were dating, if you're partnered, or prior to having a partner, that was all planned too. You would schedule a date, you would get ready with friends and go to a bar or pub or a club on a Saturday night and get dressed up and shower and do all of these. Were all rituals and rhythms. You weren't randomly having sex. It wasn't random that also all the other 20-somethings were at that same club on a Saturday night, and the drink specials and the music. That's not very curated. And as you said, in kink community, it's exceptionally curated. And so spontaneous, I think couples should really just look at that. If they have that as a value and go, that is so silly. Anything else in my life that I love doing and I care about, I put some effort and intention toward. And so if you get sort of tripped up on the word scheduled, which some people do, and I get it. It feels like, your Google Calendar is going to ding when you're supposed to have sex. But if you think about it as putting intention toward it and saying, okay, we're going to have this rhythm. And there's a lot about that not only in busy lives, but as physically, I think if you think about how often one or both of the partners is masturbating and how close in sequence you want to put that to a time that you're having intimacy with your partner, these are all things we think about, and that's all part of this intention we put behind it. And so you can take that into a conversation with your partner and say, hey, maybe Wednesday's our day. What do you think? All the kids have sport after school. Amazing. And it's something then you get to look forward to, instead of just sitting there going, oh, I wonder if he's gonna try something tonight, or vice versa. And then that just ends in disappointment most of the time.
And I actually think historically or generationally, there's been that story that as we get older, desire fades. But listening to you and sort of listen to other people and talking, it feels that that's almost been created as this. Well, as our bodies change, and we almost use that. And excuse is the wrong word, because we still have the desire. So I know of people in their 70s, 80s, and older that have a very fulfilling, intimate relationship with their partner.
Yeah.
So desire doesn't just naturally fade, then, does it?
No, I really think we should resist that narrative. And I think, one, be an advocate for your own health. So man, woman, however you identify, there's hormone replacement, there's testosterone, there's estrogen, there's all sorts of things. There's lube, there's all sorts of stuff to physically sort of make sure that you can have a thriving sex life into your old age. So I think that's important for people to not just suffer and think, oh my gosh, I'm never going to feel good again. There are ways. So that's one. But that's really more about the mechanics. Desire, my goodness, all you have to do is turn to porn, to romantasy, to affairs, to cheating, to sex work, to strip clubs, to anything to look at, oh, there is desire. I think we are craving it. I think as a community, as a society, we are craving connection and we are craving intimacy, and we want that throughout a lifespan. And if you find yourself in old age and you think, "Oh, I don't have it anymore," I think people are looking outside of their relationships to have some of those needs met. And sometimes that can be reading a book. And so nobody thinks that that's problematic. Now, if you have an affair and leave your family in financial distress, then other people take judgment on that. But desire to be loved, to be seen, to be held, to be wanted, to have an orgasm, I think people have that over a lifespan. Everybody is individual, and I think it will come in waves and ebb and flow, right? But to say it's just on this downward slope toward death, I think is doing everybody a disservice, and that's not how I want to keep living my life until I die. I don't think that sounds very fun.
Guys, are quite depressing, isn't it? Thinking about these people living live a long slope that goes faster and faster about, and then ultimately, where's you going? So you've sort of lived this. So you're not somebody that's sort of in that relationship. You've been with your partner for 18 years, 3 children. How was it? What's the experience? I know you're not your partner, but how was the experience for your partner of you writing and putting this book out into public? That sort of be like, oh gosh, this is your relationship. Then how did it? Do you find it altered your relationship, or was it coming from your relationship?
That's interesting. I think you sit down to write a book, and I had all these ideas, and I had an outline, and I had a structure, and over the course of writing, because it takes time, and over the course of talking about it, it has only positively impacted our sex life, which I would have said a year ago was great. But I'm writing so much about it, and we are talking so much about it, and I'm going to my partner and saying, "Hey, is this accurate? Did I describe this properly? Are you comfortable with me sharing this?" There's a lot in the book that's very there's a piece that's narrative, and that's me really in an attempt to normalize these experiences so that the reader can go, "Okay, yeah, this is normal." And so the process of the book has just continued to further evolve and really cement my understanding of how critical being a sexual being is, and how wonderful it is to have a sexual relationship with a partner, and just how strong it can keep partners from sort of drifting into roommate and just co-parent land and coworkers, and just how fun it can be, and how solidifying and how wonderful it is. And so my partner, he's just great. He's very supportive of the book. He's supportive of me and the message of keeping this alive. And I think it's been I think it's just such a lesson in communicating about this more only makes things better.
So when couples come to you after perhaps dinner, there's been a lack of sort of shown desire, or there's sort of been a drift. And exactly as you said, I think a lot of people end up being a sort of roommate scenario. Or perhaps the children have just left home, and they look at each other and think, "Gosh, just the two of us." Where do you? Which is actually that's pretty much where we are. So my daughter left home sort of in September to go to college. My son is got like a year or so of exams left, and that our bedroom walls are joining their bedroom walls, and obviously things are different. And I look at my wife and think, "Gosh, are we going to have like naked Wednesdays, or are we just gonna? Are we just gonna? Yeah, are we just gonna become just friends that happen to live together? how do you almost, it's not almost sort of kickstart things again, but where do couples start when they are perhaps drifting into that sort of friendship zone?
Yes, I think it's normal for couples, and I think if they've drifted into friendship or co-parent, coworker zone, it's normal and it's okay. I think if each partner on their own or together has a desire or a longing to bring it back, that's all you need. All you need is this sort of want. So, because it's a different story if you've gotten to coworker land and you don't care.
Yeah.
One party doesn't care at all. But so assuming that there's still like a disappointment or a want or a resentment even, that means there's a little kindling, right? That means
Mhm.
there's a feeling behind it, a frustration, a desire. So from that place, the partners can, one, recognize and maybe even name and communicate. Okay, we've sort we're out of practice. This is going to be awkward. We're through these conversations and potentially through these physical acts. So just like let's just put that out there that this is going to be, we're going to stumble. And then I think an opening conversation is really going to your partner, whomever initiates, not in the bedroom. It's important, over coffee, over lunch, over some other time. And I think you want to say to your partner, I love you so much. Gosh, we have this beautiful life, these beautiful children who, oh my, how can you, they're grown. It's wonderful. I love you. And I also miss being physically close with you. I miss having sex with you. I miss how we used to desire one another. And I feel like we've fallen into a little bit of a rut. And I want to bring that back because I miss that part of us and I miss that part of me. And I want to build it with you. Can we do this together? And so you can initiate that conversation from this place of connection and not you never touch me anymore. That's a one way to get to a conversation that's not going to go anywhere good. And so, but it can be such a beautiful bridge. And just know it's like you're gonna be awkward. It's if you played piano and then didn't sit down at the keys for 10 years, you're gonna fumble a little bit until you find your rhythm and your way around it again, and that's okay.
I've been making notes. Um, something else you talk about is rituals versus routines, and I wonder what the distinction is between creating a ritual and sort of following a routine.
Well, I think many in both are good. The distinction that I like to think about is what are those rituals and rhythms and routines of your daily life that are events that we think of as sort of leading to sex, the sort of pre-sex rituals and rhythms. And then there's the rituals and rhythms that create intimacy and sexuality throughout your life as partners, but that aren't direct asks for sex. And I think both are really important. So some women I know, and men likely too, but I've heard mostly from women, is that there can be these times where a man will touch her in a sexual way and she can almost shudder because she is only touched that way when when it is a request for sex implicitly. And so it feels to her, it becomes an obligatory touch as opposed to sensual. And so I think it's important that couples insert touching and kissing and joking and sexual behavior that's just when you're walking out the door to go to work. That's at any time. There needs to be those touching and those rituals that are not directly a request for sex. I think that's really important. And then the rituals and rhythms that happen sort of in preparation for sex itself are there's the logistical pieces that certainly some people like to have, like they always have a shower and that just sort of gets you into your body, Or, as I said, maybe that Wednesday's your day, and so nobody's masturbating on Tuesday so that you're more ready to go, thinking like that. And also sort of just getting into a place with your partner where you're really communicative and you have these rhythms to your sex life so that, again, back to that spontaneity, you're not just sitting there on a Saturday hoping somebody's in the mood and then being disappointed and if you're not. And then the next day, there's a touch that feels like pressure as opposed to pleasure. And that's can be just really, really damaging when that's the only type of touch, because then there's just rejection and that builds that resentment that's a really negative loop.
Mm. No, I really like that. One of the other things that I guess that a lot of people, gosh, we're talking about when you're sort of in an established relationship, but almost right at the other end, when you're sort of going through puberty, just starting to understand your own feelings, whatever, that we're often, that's often the time where maybe our feelings and thoughts about sex are crystallized. So I don't know, we're maybe told that, oh, that's dirty, don't touch stuff like that, don't do that. Or when we start to perhaps explore our own bodies and masturbate, you have to do it very quickly because, oh my gosh, imagine somebody comes into the bathroom, into the bedroom, oh my gosh. And we never actually get into we never actually almost establish what a self-pleasure practice looks like, or never really get to know our own bodies. And how important do you think it is that people almost own their own pleasure and know what it takes to make them orgasm almost before they get into a dynamic with another person?
I think it's critical. I would hesitate to go so far that it's mandatory, because I do think that human beings grow in connection with others. And so I think that certainly people can learn their bodies in a safe partnership with one another, with another person. However, I fully agree with you that when people are coming of age and in their adolescence, that there's almost no talk about masturbation and how that is such a beautiful time for you to explore the pleasure side of what you've probably to that point only been told is these are private areas and this is, no one else should touch them, et cetera. And hopefully you're learning pieces around consent.
Mm-hmm.
But children are really smart. And so I really believe that when things aren't talked about, what they learn is that shame narrative. And so parents have a real opportunity to have good, open conversations, even if the kid is uncomfortable and all that, to talk about, okay, like your body's changing. We're seeing it. Your face is getting pimples, you're growing body hair, whatever, all the other signs of puberty, and saying, and you might start to feel things in your private areas. And that's so exciting. That's such a wonderful part of becoming a human being. And you might want to explore that. And I think that that's great, because just like any body part, like your eyes or your ears, that means it's functioning and it's working well. And you get to explore that. It's private. So these are things you do on your own. It doesn't mean it's bad. It simply means that this is something you do on your own. I think there's language around that. And then I think it is just keeping that conversation going. There's safety, certainly for girls. I think this is where there's a double standard where boys are just like, okay, just, don't flush your socks down the toilet sort of conversation. And it's more about plumbing than it is about pleasure. And with girls, I think there's a real dearth of, this is good for you. You can try these things. And because again, girl sexuality just isn't treated the same as boys. So I think, our kids are 7, 9, and 11. We've started these conversations with them, and we've started, age appropriate consent and safety and all of that. And I think a lot of parents might be a little confused about where to start with those conversations. And just like if you're coming back to your partner and feeling like roommates after 30 years, you can start those conversations with your kids at any point and say, okay, you're 18. I probably should have had this conversation with you starting 10 years ago, but I didn't. And so here we are, and this is going to be weird, but here we go. And everybody can just kind of enter into it with a little bit of a laugh, and your child, they'll hear something. They'll listen, even if they claim they're not. I think that even if they're like, ugh, the eye rolls, they're taking some of it in.
Mm. It's funny. So last week I took our car for its annual service. There's nothing wrong with it. We just took it a service and sort of
Regular
make
maintenance,
sure,
yeah.
regular sort of checkup and things. But I think that's just a car. It just drives us from A to B. But then I think about, as you've been talking, I'm thinking about sort of almost design. I'm thinking about often we get to a place where it's become a source of conflict, or it's something that we don't have anymore. So pushback on it is almost, why don't we have that sort of service? Is it almost I don't know what the right word is. Is it almost a conversation we should be having earlier? So to sort of preempt this, like a bit like the car service, something we should be doing almost as a check-in with each other that sort of preempts
Sure.
any, rather than you get to this big point where, and sometimes it just becomes you never want to have sex, you always want to have sex, I never want to have sex, you always want to have, and it just becomes this argument, really. How do you catch it before that happens?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think it is, if you entered into a relationship with a partner with the assumption you were going to have sex, you were going to share finances, you were going to have kids, and what's so interesting is sometimes that even that just first thing that you were going to have sex, it's never said out loud. We might talk more about our retirement plans than we do about our sex lives. And so it really does go back to couples outside of the bedroom, outside of problems. There's always opportunities to just say, hey, how are you feeling about things lately? I've noticed, we're having sex more, we're having sex less, or, oh, like you tried this thing the other day. Just find an entry point to the conversation and have that regularly. You're very right. I mean, it shouldn't wait until there's a problem. Have it all the time. It's just how you prioritize everything in your life. There is a regular attention to it. And if we're doing a good job, there's a preventative attunement, and just saying, okay, let's talk. How's it going? How are you feeling about us lately? I mean, my partner and I will just sort of at dinner, when it's just the two of us, just say, yeah, how are you feeling about our sex life lately? What's going on? Are you feeling good? And if you have that conversation regularly, it's far less likely to end in tears or end in yelling. But if you're only having that conversation, once a year, and you're very scared, and you're going, oh, how do you feel about our sex life? Because you don't want to hear the answer, because you can already start to feel the tension of potential resentment, then it is going to end badly. So I think that frequency in the conversation about sex itself will mitigate some of the ways in which those conversations can go poorly. Just the more you do it, you're less likely to enter into a huge catastrophe by paying attention to it, just like your car.
Mm. Yeah, the car's going to be fine. But I'm not sure what to think about this now after hearing you talk, because one thing I've always thought is that within a partnership, sometimes there's a discrepancy between desire. One person might want intimacy this number of times a week, one person this number of times a month, etc. And I've always thought, well, gosh, what you would do is close that gap. So we both want it 3 times a week or twice a month, or is that, listening to you talk, that almost feels like the wrong way to think about it now, that actually it's almost natural that desire comes and goes at different times, and it's just a case of working around that. Is that a better way of thinking about it, rather than trying to think, no, we've got to be on the same page, it's got to be twice a week or twice a month or nothing?
Yeah, I like the way you're describing it as a little bit more of a fluid kind of moving target. I think I don't think the labels are serving anyone. So there is a lot out there that's like, you're the low libido, low desire person in the couple, and you're the high desire. And so how do we align? And that's a very static way of thinking. And desire doesn't live like that. I mean, we've all had periods of our life where we're more stressed or more whatever, and usually libido is negatively impacted in those moments. So it's evolving, and then the dynamic within the couple, it's its own ecosystem that needs to be nurtured and tended to, and it's gonna evolve too. I think what you say is, I think it's really insightful in that it's not so much, okay, I only want to have sex once a week and you want to have it 4 times, so we'll have it 2 or 3 times depending. It I think there's often layers to unpack, which is really starting with, okay, you say you want to have sex once and you say you want to have it 4. How are you What does good sex look like to you? How are you defining sex? Do you like to be touched? Do you want to be wanted? Do you like kissing? What is it that you're looking for from me when you want to have sex? Is that an orgasm? Where does masturbation fall into the realm of your relationship, and allowance or not, as couples have sort of different rules? And so I think couples can immediately go to, like, I'm high, you're low, fine, we'll find something in the middle. And they're not peeling that layer. And again, just saying, oh, okay, so you want to have sex 4 times a week. Like, tell me more about what that's about for you, and what need are you getting met? Is that sheerly physical orgasm? Is that a sense of longing and a sense of desire? Is it playfulness? Is it I, I mean, that's where there's just a huge gamut of what need people are really having met. And that's where it's really, I mean, what you said, just have that conversation, because it's really gonna I think it will unearth, and I bet you're likely to end that conversation by no longer having those rigid labels of, you're low, I'm high. I think it's really unlikely once you really unpack it.
That was a really interesting experience, just hearing you there. See, I could feel myself on either side of that conversation, and it just felt like a really warm, encouraging, interesting conversation to have. And I can't imagine putting myself on either side of the sort of couch and having that conversation. I can't imagine myself feeling like uncomfortable having that conversation. And I've always had this, I think, gosh, it's really hard to ask, and the other person feel uncomfortable. But actually, listen to you just using those words in that tone, and expressing that. And it's almost expressing a real interest in your partner in a really warm and safe way. So I really thank you. That was just hearing the way you express that it feels something I could be very comfortable doing. I'm sure lots of people listening could feel very comfortable having that. No, thank you. That was that really hit me. Thank you.
Oh, that's lovely. I really do think underneath a lot of resentment and anxiety and confusion is just this really beautiful desire to connect and be loved, and to express that through this physical space. And that's such a wonderful sentiment. I mean, to have somebody come to you and say, I long for you, and I long for this part of us. And okay, you still might have different experiences of what that looks like, right? You still might have, I like chocolate ice cream, you like vanilla. Okay, great. So we still have this longing for the ice cream. So we're almost there. I mean, we're in a good spot, and then it's just the details after that.
Mm. Do you think we evolved to become naturally monogamous? It's sort of, when I look back and I sort of read sort of history, etc., it doesn't feel like a natural state from even a few centuries ago, but and almost I know it's not the same as saying, well, you've got to pick one friend for the rest of your life. That's the only friend you can have. And you have one child, the rest of your life is the only child you can have. I know it's not the same, but does it? Because I totally understand there's a real difference between ethical non-monogamy and polygamy
Sure.
and
Sure.
cheating, having affairs. The two are almost completely different sides of the scope, really. So, yeah, do you feel as monogamy is a natural state?
There could just be a whole podcast on just have we evolved to be
You'll have to come back.
monogamous beings? And really interesting, the director of the Kinsey Institute just released a book maybe a month or two ago. I believe it's Intimate Animal. Don't quote me on that, but he's a scientist who has really looked at exactly that, sort of what is monogamy, and are we there's social monogamy. I think he breaks it down in sort of social monogamy and sexual monogamy, and he sort of has different ways of articulating how humans are socially monogamous in the sense of like creating the family and sharing the finances and the sort of logistics of it all, but sexually monogamous is a different story, and I think he really tries to understand that to think that humans are supposed to be sexually monogamous in the way that we now live that out. I think he has a lot of questions around that, as do a lot of people. And Esther Perel has talked quite a bit about how marriages used to be that your spouse met maybe one need, but you got needs from friends and your church and your business and potentially other sexual partners. And now we're at a place where your partner is supposed to be your world. They're supposed to be your thought partner, your confidant, potentially your business partner, your sexual partner, everything. And that is, I think, for many people, too much. So I really think the conversation around ethical non-monogamy and, are we, quote, evolved to be monogamous is a really deep and important conversation, because monogamy is really grounded in property and grounded in constructs of ownership and power dynamics that are about male owning female power. And so there's so much there. And I think we're seeing examples that are sort of more out in public about different types of relationships that are really successful and happy and loving, that don't necessarily follow the traditional monogamous stereotype or standard. And I think that's a really welcome conversation for people to just explore. And not to say that couples should be ethically non-monogamous, but simply I think there's this piece of, there's the relationships that maybe you've seen where it's like one or the other partner can't even acknowledge that another human being on the planet is attractive. They can't even watch a movie and say, oh, he's good looking or she's good looking. And I think, I think of that, oh my goodness, this is just theatrics. How can we live like this? And so some of these questions around monogamy and is it natural, it simply, I think, can lend to facilitate these other things of just recognizing we're human. And it's just because you find another person attractive or have potentially desire does not mean that you don't love and want to spend your whole life and commit your whole life to the other person. Those two things can coexist. Yeah. And I think for a lot of people that even just kind of wrapping our brains around that would help facilitate more of an honest, open dynamic within a couple.
Mm. Can I crave your forgiveness for 1 second? No, thank you. And we should definitely do another episode on monogamy and non-monogamy. So I just quickly Google it, and it's called The Intimate Animal by Dr.
Is that right? Okay.
Justin Garcia. Yeah, and I think it's just exactly like you say. I'll probably watch a film or whatever and think, gosh, I better not say that person's good looking, or even male or female. It's almost that that sort of prequel to cheating, which such and I think one of the most common role plays is stranger in a bar. So I'm meeting somebody who's not our partner. And that's not cheating. It's just, you're still with your partner, but you perhaps you want to explore what it might feel to be somebody new.
Exactly. And I think that's, yeah, the novelty and being desired by somebody else is, you want to be desired from your partner, but people like to walk around the planet and go, oh, somebody hit on me. I mean, my husband, he comes back from the grocery store and he's like, yeah, I think the checkout lady hit on me. And I'm like, great. Yes, you've still got it. You're happy about that. Like, I fully support that. And I fully trust you that doesn't mean anything about our relationship in a negative fashion at all. And that's wonderful. And that's how we function. I think that's just very normal. And it says nothing negative about our relationship that someone else found him attractive or that he might walk around the planet and think, that woman is good looking. Okay, great. He has eyes. That's fine.
I remember when my wife and I met at work years ago. I remember somebody coming into the room, into the office, and sort of, and then they're back to us and sort of look around. I thought, oh my God, that woman is so gorgeous. And I just turned to the guy next to me and said, "He's a woman. She's so pretty." I said, "That's Justine," and it was my partner. And she was something different, and I just hadn't recognized. I don't know what. We weren't living together at the time, so she got dressed in the morning without me seeing her, and she wore something new. And I thought, wow, she's so lovely. And I thought, oh, it's okay. I can't even find her. I tried to my wife. I tried to was another woman. My wife to be. So no, yeah, it was interesting to hear that. And I think all of us, yeah, absolutely, we get a bit of a boost out of somebody else finding our partner attractive. Why not? Wouldn't we? We don't want to be the only one that sees it. So no, that's it.
Of course, I think it's a compliment to you.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I picked well. Somebody else thinks
absolutely, yeah.
partner's good looking. That's great. Yeah.
I think one of the things that we've perhaps seen changed in the last, I'm not sure how long, maybe it's like 20 years, 10 years, whatever, that there's been a big surge in the openness of marketing for intimacy aids, vibrators, and different elements. Do you find that they are helpful in a relationship? So I'm talking to somebody, and I think he found out that his partner had a vibrator, and he felt really diminished by it. I was really surprised. He felt, oh my God, she doesn't need me. She's got this lump of sort of plastic and the batteries in it. I think, well, that isn't you, is it? It's something completely different. And it really took him a while to get his head around it. That wasn't his wife saying that she no longer needed him. And I wonder how. So do you think in that instance, is it something to almost? I'm not saying you should explore everything together, but it's not certainly not something you should need to keep as a secret almost.
No, I certainly don't think you need to keep it as a secret. And I think it can be facilitative for both your dynamic as a couple or your solo play. I think all of that is really great and an opportunity to understand and find things that you like. And I think your friend's reaction is really normal because so much around sex and intimacy just hits right at an ego soft spot for so many people. And so, okay, so if she can have an orgasm in 30 seconds from this vibrator, what does she need me for? And am I not good enough, or whatever the other case may be? And so I think it's just like different. You listen to different songs on different days and different moods. And it's also certainly things you can bring into the bedroom to help spice things up and add different dynamics. I do think sometimes people can quickly turn if you're in a bit of a rut or however you define it. There is sometimes I see the sort of more hack or gimmicky side of sex advice that says like, well, just go get a vibrator, or just do a role play, or just try something, and they don't do any of that introspection. And so if you're in a rut and you say, okay, well, let's just go get a vibrator and take that into the bedroom, it might be fun. And I'm not saying that wouldn't be enjoyable, but let's also check out, like, is there something else going on, and that have those desire conversations and have those longing conversations, and not look at using the vibrator as just a quick fix or a pill to try to solve potentially a different type of issue. So I think that's important for people and couples to think about.
Mm. And I often think one of the best analogies for sex and intimacy is our relationship with food. And we can go out and we can have some fast food and eat something while we're driving along almost have no idea what we're eating, but we're fulfilling a nutritional need. Or we can sit down in a beautiful restaurant or have an amazing picnic or whatever, and literally you can eat a peach or a nectarine and you can really feel the taste of it, feel the juice, feel the sensation. It can be an amazing experience. Or you can just eat it while you're on your phone or whatever else. It's the same thing, and it's the same with intimacy in a way, isn't it? That we can have something very quick. We can have a quick kiss or whatever, or we can have this amazing, long, enjoyable, just intimate experience that might be penetration, might not be, but they're all fulfilling the need that you have at the time, but they're both nourishing, but in different ways. Is that a good analogy?
Yes. I think that makes a lot of sense, because I think couples can sometimes get stuck on they're only having this sort of food is fuel, sex is fuel sort of type of sex sometimes. And that's like, okay, we only have 10 minutes. Let's just go do this thing. And there can be judgment put on those sexual encounters that that's not good enough, and I don't think you want all of them to be like that, but that's great. That is good for your relationship too. The sort of mundane sex is important. The wild, the intimate, that's important too. The 20 minutes, the 2 hours, all of that's important to weave in. None of them are bad, because that's again where we can get into the shame of, oh, well, I'm not going to do it because we don't have 2 hours to do the massage and to do all of the buildup, and I want it all to be perfect, so we just won't do anything. And that's not good either. Sometimes you do need the fast food version, and sometimes you have the elegant tasting menu. And they're all great, and I think it is a good analogy. They're all important and they all serve a purpose, and you would go broke if you only did the fancy night out. So you don't always have time for that. So you also have to include the opportunity and variety that are going to be a little quicker, that are going to be potentially more routine. Those can still be really fun, and they can still go back to that binding nature of sex in a couple that keeps you a couple and not just roommates. I think that kind of mundane sex really serves that purpose very, very well and is really important.
Yeah, I think it's really important what you said about don't let a desire for perfect get in the way. I was going to say nothing's ever going to be perfect. There's always something that doesn't feel quite right, and whether it's in any aspects of life, but we have this sort of human desire for perfection that just gets in the way of fun.
Absolutely. It's too much pressure. It's too much pressure. People should take that pressure down.
And my final question, so after going through the experience of writing the book and seeing the book living and it's out there, what's next on the horizon for you?
I found the process of writing to be so edifying of my own perspective and process. And I've enjoyed it so much more than I ever could have imagined. And so it's only just spurred more ideas and more thoughts to write. I've been spending a lot of time writing on Substack and doing little essays and engaging with that community. And hopefully from that, the next idea comes for a full book, and I'll just keep these conversations alive and well.
Fabulous. Well, thank you so much for your time again. It was a real pleasure to talk to you. So I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. It was lovely.